let's start by doing some brief introductions. I mean, I'm very pleased to have such an amazing panel of all different aspects, different views across the financing of the region. So we have Peter Whelan, who'll miss his intro, but he's with PwC, but he comes from Rothschild, ABN AMRO, and he even used to work at LSE, I see, at some point. So quite an illustrious background. And then we have Christopher, who is here, so thank you for that, who's also got a banking background, worked with Squarebank and NatWest, and has his own advisory now. Of course, Ayuna, mentioned, from the London Stock Exchange. Thank you for joining us, Jen. And then Alex Methrall from VTB Capital, who's also worked for JP Morgan and Dresden Kleinwort in the past. And Bomik, my colleague from UK Export Finance, who's got a background in a variety of banks, SocGen, Citigroup, Standard Bank, HSBC, and Ingo, who's an industry person, having a background in Rio Tinto, which I didn't know till I read your bio. So I think we've got a good range of different experience. You see, I'm keeping talking while the room fills up and the panelists arrive. But now we seem to have a full house, so I'd like each of them to say in 1 minute, one sentence, what their particular interest is in this panel. So maybe Bomik, you start?
Yes, sure. I think thank you for the introduction. I work in UK Export Finance, which is a government department. That is now under the umbrella of the Department of International Trade. Our really mission and objective, and frankly the reason why we exist, is to promote British exporters and ensure that if there is a viable export, it does not fail for lack of financial support. Central Asia is an important market for us. Thank you. It's an important market for us. We see a lot of growth prospects. And as one demonstration of that was the successful IGC that we had last week, where along with DIT, UKIP was a key part of the various agreements that were signed. So I'm here hoping that first from the British side there's interest to explore further opportunities in the region, and from the side of the sponsors encourage them to look at British support and British exporters. Because we are there to provide the financial aspect of it.
Arthur and also, thank you for the invite. Hamilton Partners is a London-based merchant bank and we focus on metals and mining and oil and gas. So we have clients in Far East, Russia, Kazakhstan and Mongolia, usually around M&A activities and fundraising.
Thank you, Russ. Macro Advisory is a locally based independent. As the name suggests, macro advisor. We work across the whole region from Ukraine to Mongolia down to Central Asia, Caucasus. We advise companies on economic, business, investment, political trends, etc. throughout the region.
Yeah, good afternoon. My name is Peter Whelan. I lead the independent equity advisory team at PwC, previously at Rothschild, and led the team there, and also actually worked for Ian for 6 or 7 years with UK. And what I look to do is be very much sort of company and stakeholder side, helping through the path on IPOs, to see how we are best prepared to step the right banks and take through that journey.
Thank you, Ross. Likewise, with some of my colleagues on the panel, we have a very, very extensive Central Asian business, and my team focuses on raising financing, particularly on the equity side, but also on the debt side, across the whole region, but with a particular focus here in London on the advisory, the M&A and the debt.
Okay. Hi, my name is Ayuna and thank you for the introduction, Ross. As Rose mentioned, I head up Russia, CIS and Mongolia at the London Stock Exchange from the primary markets perspective across equity and debt. I work with companies that seek to raise international capital in London, but equally I work very closely with all of the advisors, capital markets advisors in London to ensure the connectivity between the companies, investors and advisors.
Great, thank you. So Alex, I'm going to start with you with a question. So with the downturn in the mining industry, which we're all hoping has passed now, or past the bottom, are there sources of mining finance available to this region?
I think the sort of short response to that is yes, very much so. I think you've had let's call it an interregnum of a couple of years where I think finance has been hard to track down. There's probably a Venn diagram when I say yes in terms of attractiveness. I think there's a particular interest around the PGM space. There's a particular interest on the gold space. Diamonds have been popular both in the region and outside the region. I think there are still some circumspect views around new finance, new investment into the coal space, into the iron ore space. I think steel feels a little bit better, but it's still challenged. But yes, I would have said if you were trying to sort of characterize the temperature, the last 6 months has been much more interesting with regards to companies wanting to raise funds and being able to do it both on the banking side and also on the equity side. And we probably have, well, we have 3 projects that we're looking at the moment. One in the PGM space, slightly larger, probably a 7-figure raise, but that's probably 75% debt. Debt finance, that will be debt from banks, probably about 500, and from, let's call it the various credit support, ECA help, around about 400. So I think there is renewed appetite, and I think the pipeline, if I look forwards over the next 12 months, feels much more productive than it has for a couple of years.
Because there's a feeling that banks are increasingly, in general, moving away from mining finance. So obviously your bank is still willing to lend to or raise money for this region. Is that generally the case? Are there other banks who are in the market?
I mean, yes, I think clearly BTB has been reasonably active in the region for obvious reasons. But yes, there are a number of other banks, a number of the European banks still interested in providing funding into the space. I think that the decision-making process is a bit longer. I think there is still a predilection to be closer to let's call it a brownfield development prospect rather than a pure greenfield development prospect. So I mean, just to be sort of give more greater clarity, we had something last week that looks very minerally attractive and comes with no infrastructure, no transport, and no power. And that just at the moment we're probably not at that place in the cycle to be finding lots of people putting their hand up to support that. But where the infrastructure is there, definitely the banks are still active.
Okay, so Iona, coming to you. What about equity financing? What's the appetite like for listing and public equity raising for companies operating in this region?
We have definitely seen an increase in activity since the beginning of the year, actually. Compared to 2015, this year has been far more vibrant and looking both at equity and debt. So I'm looking at the region overall, so CIS as a whole. And recently we've had Polish Gold, Eurobond issuance. Lukoil did 1 billion. Actually, last week EBRD, as you may know, raised nearly 100 million in Kazakh denominated bond in London. So a lot of activity, follow-on offerings by listed issuers. Interestingly, when you ask, when we talk about appetite, we would really need to look at appetite both from companies and investors, because clearly when the valuations are low, a lot of shareholders wouldn't want to go ahead with a public offering because the price is not attractive to them. And equally, investors wouldn't want to overpay for certain stories. And this dynamic, I think, is starting to change. I think going into 2017, we will see a higher level of demand from both sides in terms of equity listings.
Okay. And Peter, you advise companies on equity listings. So what do you need to consider when you're doing an IPO and going through this process?
Thanks, Ross. I think part of it is that picking up on this point. Frankly, it's been quite a sort of a cool period. There hasn't been so much activity, but you can see, certainly on my side, even in the past sort of month or so, the degree to which there's been a level of sort of uptick in potential projects. And I suppose one of the questions from that is, okay, if you're a business that's looking to tap public markets, you're looking to step forward on an IPO, what are the things to think about? And there's a part of it whereby you have the asset you have, and it has its certain characteristics. The global commodity prices are going to be in a way where they're going to be. So what are the things that are under your control in order that you can make your business most attractive to public investors? And in relation to the things which are under your control in your business, that there is an aspect of looking to behave in a public listed type of way, a good way ahead of tapping public markets. The centre of gravity on IPOs has come far, far earlier. If we're going out, we're pitching to someone like Alex from DTV to kick a deal off. After the bank selection, now you're often just in a matter of weeks going out and meeting investors. These early look meetings become absolutely essential to getting deals done. You're then in a period whereby you're out meeting investors really very, very quickly, perhaps 3 or 4 weeks after having met the banks. And are you ready to do that? I think the other observation across the region for international investors is the political position and the degree to which that has been off-putting. And I suppose there's a key part when we're looking at assets which are government related, the degree to which outside investors can have some understanding of the stability of the position and what risk they're taking. And if you look at some of the sort of most significant deals which have got done, typically there has been an individual who is in a prominent position who can actually help ensure that there's an alignment of interest so that some of that is reduced, both on the political side and equally within a company. So there's a driving force because otherwise a good number of these deals don't get done or they miss the window. The last point I'd make is that also it's been a cool period. There hasn't been so much activity. If you look at the CIS region, we go back to Alex on deals we've been on, a good number of people that we'll have worked with have been culled. The number of experienced CIS bankers has significantly reduced. Equally, on the mining side, the number of mining bankers has been reduced. So when you're selecting the right bank to go with, there's a key part to see. Go beyond the badge on the front and look to see who the individuals have really got the experience to help deliver a deal and will be with you to ensure that delivery.
So it sounds like there's quite a lot to prepare. Are there particular additional thoughts that you have to have in mind if you're operating in the CIS region and you're looking to list?
I think I've sort of covered a good number of them in what I said earlier. I think there is an element where one deal that I worked on a few years ago, which was in a different sector, but it really knocked people back because of its level of preparation. Was this called Lenta, business out of Russia, but TPG had prepared that business to sell to Walmart and therefore had invested heavily, so the systems in there were pretty much akin to Walmart level. And I suppose it's the degree to which in that preparation, you can be actually positively surprising investors. They've been badly burned by some of the experiences. So I think there's a level of preparation. I think there's also fundamentally an element whereby investors sense that there's a partnership. They've been badly burned by some experiences in the past whereby they feel that they've been on the wrong side of the balance. So I think that actually what's needed is to deliver and not just have words, but to show that you've made progress, and equally people feel that there's going to be money made on both sides.
Okay, over to you, Vomik. Peter was talking about the interest of having, the importance of having people who actually know the industry. And we're very pleased that Vomik comes from a mining finance background, and we have him at UKF now. But Vomik, being a government organisation, does UK Export Finance really have an appetite for Central Asia?
Yes, well, I think for us, as far as the Central Asian Republic is concerned, and there I will include the former Soviet republics as well as Mongolia. This is an area where we see significant British interest. It varies from country to country, but that is a theme, and the government is there to support and ensure that we have adequate appetite for these countries. And this is not just the big boys like Kazakhstan. 10 days ago I was in Uzbekistan, had a very fruitful 2-3 days in Tashkent, where there are a number of interesting mining projects along with some other situations that we are looking at. So as far as appetite is concerned, yes, we have first of all the financial appetite, but also the strategic willingness and commitment to do more to support our businesses in this part of the world. Some of you may have picked up last week our Chancellor's autumn statement. That in that statement, UKEF and its appetite and commitment was a key part of the Chancellor's statement, and that basically committed to doubling the amount of overall or the size of our overall book that we can have. At the moment, we have a certain limit on our countries, but at the moment, as of now, as we speak, we are undertaking an exercise which will allow us to increase that limit for each country up to twice the level that is today.
So how does it work? How can ECA funding actually support projects? So we heard from a range of mining companies this morning. How could you work with them to support the development of their projects?
Yes, I think for us, as the name suggests, we will only get involved if there is a UK export involved. But what we believe that we have a very compelling and competitive offering as far as financial packages are concerned. Without going into too many technical details, but in terms of the general guidelines and parameters that we work along with, in any project or funding need, what we are looking for is what you may have heard, a UK content of 20%. So by UK content, we mean if there is a project, a mining project or a smelter or a refinery, a metallurgical project, as long as 20% is in goods and services, we are a service-based economy. 80% of our economy is service-related. So we count services such as design, engineering, consulting, very much part of the UK content. As long as 20% of a project is coming from the UK, that meets our first criteria, and we can look into the funding details. Without that, there isn't much we can do. We are not a sovereign wealth fund. We are not a fund that is looking to make equity investments abroad. We are there really to make sure that if our businesses are going out and are interested in Central Asia, we can provide them the financial support. What makes us competitive is that on the basis of this 20% UK content, we can provide funding support of up to 85% of the total financing requirement. So let's say if there's a project that requires funding of 100 million, 25 million is coming from the UK. We can look to support up to 85% of that project. There are some other details which I don't, otherwise I'll be talking all afternoon. But we propose, but the important point for the audience to understand is that we provide disproportionately larger financial support in relation to the actual UK content that's going in. The banks love us because we provide them a guarantee on the back of our government, so it effectively de-risk the credit risk from their perspective, and we also have a direct lending capability which is open to the Central Asian market. So I think just a couple of final thoughts. We do need a bank. So for sponsors who are looking at UKEF support, we don't replace a bank. We're not licensed to operate as a bank. So we work very much hand in hand with the financial institution. And yes, I think we are very open to getting involved as early as possible. Some of the discussions that the government is aware of, we are in conversation with project sponsors, for a financing that might come online 2 years later. But we have the time and the willingness to push our exposure as much as we can.
Thank you. Now coming to you again. Do you think that the governments and state-owned entities in the region understand enough about the financing process and what financiers need to be able to make a project work?
Yeah, I mean, let me take the example probably of the two most important countries, which is Kazakhstan and Mongolia in this context. I think there was always a strong interest and willingness to understand and to engage. Clearly, the fall in oil and in metals prices has only accelerated this, but at the same time, less investment or less advisors and banks were going into the region to actively engage. But if you look now back over a couple of years, when I was still at the Rio Tinto, for instance, in Kazakhstan, we had a couple of targets that they wanted to engage with. In 2011, there was, I think, the last prime ministerial visit to Kazakhstan a couple of decades ago. There was no IGC set up, there was no formal exchange. So we really struggled to find the right avenues to get into the country. So if you fast forward into 2016, there was clearly a lot of progress made on mineral tenders, there was a lot of progress made on the mining codes, and I think is an increasing understanding what is necessary to attract investment and business, which is partly driven by companies that are active there, of course also Kazakh companies that are somehow linked to the capital markets. Even so, the focus has probably shifted more to Russian and Chinese banks in the last couple of years. But clearly the state entities are well informed what's going on. I mean, let's not forget when you look at Tauk and Samruk that they have very significant joint ventures, or the Ministry of Finance in one case, with organizations that have, so to say, very big partners or international financing. Karst Geology probably stands out as the real success factor in a way, because it is the entity that in Kazakhstan crystallized and finally investments by Korean entities, Japanese entities, Rio Tinto, Eluka, and so on, relatively early stage, but nevertheless, this is exactly the kind of partner organizations you want to have if you finally want to make an investment as a major or as a small organization. And we have met Karst Geology probably at least every single year over the last 5 years. And the professionalism in the organization is fantastic. Yeah? Similarly, in Erdenes, when you now go to Mongolia, Mongolia, of course, had, I think, a very significant political change that really changed the perception of the country. And in Erdenes' case, the changes that you saw in the management of the organization were extremely well perceived in the last couple of months. I mean, we had several investors, because you will probably ask me about exploration as well, several investor meetings around exploration projects in Mongolia in a 2 months period, which were all reverse inquiries, and they were very large, predominantly North American funds, family offices, and single investors. Yeah.
Very interesting. Seeing as you brought up exploration, so we traditionally think that the only projects that will get financed are those that are within a year of production, and that the banks won't look at anything else. Are you saying there actually is financing, particularly in this region, for early stage exploration?
Yeah, I mean, it's obviously a more difficult question because it always depends on the quality of the project. But if you refer back to banks, yes, I think larger banks have clearly moved out of this space. I mean, there is you need it as really risk capital equity funding, and then you are well advised to probably have a regional partner. I guess therefore it's a little bit trickier because you have no sponsor to get the mix right. But overall, the focus is back on both regions, partly driven by reforms, partly driven by a generally better base metals basket price, partly by that people think it is a good time to go back into exploration globally, full stop. Yeah? People that really drive these early stage projects are usually the ones that also have a good recipe to then attract also financing.
Interesting. So Christopher, you've been waiting patiently there.
Yes.
Yeah. So Kazakhstan has moved up quite dramatically in the World Bank ratings for the ease of doing business, from 51 to 35 in this year. So does a statistic like that actually make it easier to do business in a country like Kazakhstan, or does it not really make any difference at all?
But it helps, obviously. Perception is a big part of the process, particularly for foreign investors. When you're a geologist and you go back to headquarters, whether it's in London or New York, whatever, the perception of the decision makers is quite important. So in the case of Kazakhstan and other countries in the region have been focusing on surveys like World Bank in order to, as an indicator that they are becoming more receptive to foreign investment. But it's cosmetic. Much more important, of course, is what's actually happening. And across the region right now, we are seeing, I would say, a significant change in attitude from whether it's Russia, Mongolia, I think very soon now Uzbekistan. Governments need. There's an understanding that the kind of like the easy path is over. If you take Russia as an example, 2000, 2013, 14, government didn't really have to care too much about creating incentive for foreign investors. They had the resources, the economy was doing well, there was plenty of interest. Now conditions are a lot tougher, clearly, for many reasons the case of Russia, but the government really has to focus on attracting investment into a number of sectors for the next 5 or 6 years. So creating incentives, attractive real incentives, whether it's tax or other breaks, you've got to really push that as they've never done before, because they need to get the economy back on track. In the case of Russia, we do see that the focus is shifting more towards processing rather than production or exploration. They want companies who can come in with a combined package that can process, in other words, increase the value of the product and move up the value-added chain in extractive industries. A lot of what we do is encapsulated in Mongolia. That's a good example of the type of interaction we have in companies. Obviously, you all remember years ago, Mongolian economy was booming, 17, 18% GDP, on the back of very high levels of FDI. Then the whole political base changed, as well as, of course, the sliding commodity prices, difficulties in China. Because of the attitude of the opposition parties, you see great reluctance for investment. It stopped it. FDI came down. The economy this year will be lucky not to slide into recession. But we've had an election in the summer. Former opposition party has now kind of reinvented itself as very pro investment, but they clearly have some very tricky issues to resolve. They have stated clearly that they want to attract investment into the mining sector, they want to make it attractive, and on the other hand they're saying they want to take more money out of the mining sector because they need it for the budget. So that's kind of partly what we do, help companies resolve what does the political economic trend mean in terms of business attractiveness, operating conditions, currency, capital flows and costs. And I think across the whole region, next weekend is the presidential election of Uzbekistan. You're going to see a completely different attitude there as well. And I think in Kazakhstan, where you've got a question about, it's happening as well, but a bit more slowly. President Nazarbayev clearly looks fit and well, but there is part of this now process of where Kazakh is going, how it's going to attract investment, and for companies that's partly understanding that as well as what might happen when the political transition comes as well. So I think there's a lot of those macro issues involved in the process as well as the geological.
Interesting, because you were talking about Russia trying to beneficiate into a higher degree in country. That's
Yes.
a trend we see in Kazakhstan as well,
Yes.
with Almaty Tech Garden looking for
Sure.
technology.
And they will
because,
be, they have a good advantage in the sense of the Chinese Silk Road, or the One Belt, One Road, that very extensive transportation rail system that China is building to the west. And a big part of that will go through Kazakhstan, another leg will go through Uzbekistan and Mongolia. But of course, it's not just all about exporting product from China to the west across those countries. Once the rail lines are there, it means that Kazakhstan and other countries also have considerably enhanced potential to import to export along those same lines. So it does mean that you know, where previously you might say, why am I even thinking of building a smelter here? Now there'll be a railway not that far away, or in the next couple of years.
Interesting. Coming back to you, Alex. The one issue that I've seen is there are a large number of projects with a Soviet resource and no feasibility study looking for investment. And it's very difficult for us to be able to assess how attractive they really are. What needs to be in place to attract an international investor into a project?
And I think this goes back to the conversation we had at the beginning around the state of development of the project, and whether this is really a pure greenfield project or whether this is something which has had relevant metallurgy studies, feasibility studies that have been conducted on it.
Yeah.
I think increasingly, both from a regional banking perspective, but also from a, let's call it a London banking perspective, having the technology input of some of the sort of sophisticated household names that we have here from an engineering perspective, more and more increasingly ensuring that that the JORC code has been utilised to, let's say, recalibrate the GKZ underlying numbers has become a sort of fundamental prerequisite, at least of the financing community. So I think that's why I'm saying I think the time to market or the preparation time seems to have expanded into a sort of 2 to 3 year window of preparation rather than a sort of speeded up 12 to 18 months. And as a result, if you like, the projects that are coming forward, the sort of historic regional CIS Soviet analysis has been replaced in large part by UK, in some instances Australian counterparts who have reworked that. And I think that's why the pipeline is beginning to fill up of the ones that banks are getting more comfortable with looking at and providing funding both on the equity and debt side.
If I can come to you again. There was a stage a few years ago where there were a lot of regional companies who were listing to London, and that seems to have dried up. Do you see that happening again as the environment improves?
Thank you, Rose, and I would challenge the wording dried up, but it has certainly reduced, yes. At the moment we have 101 companies from Russia, CIS and Mongolia on our markets, which is still a huge number. I think overall market cap, is about 470 billion, which has increased overall since the beginning of the year quite substantially. In terms of the expectation, yes, I think, and I started talking about this earlier in this panel, is that expectation is that this number will increase next year. And there are very, very solid reasons for that. I think first of all we have to look at the macroeconomic outlook, and that's, and you would see, the trickle-down effect. It usually starts with Russia, right? And then the currency, where the currency is, where the GDP is, and then the oil price and the precious metals prices, and then that affects, Kazakhstan and the neighboring republics to an extent, of course. But then with Kazakhstan itself, you can see that they have made a lot of progress in terms of, pension reform, developing local exchanges and so on, and also preparing the companies to list. So that is the other part to the process. So and also politically, and the politics is also important. And this is, as my fellow panelists spoke about today, it's all about perception as well as the hard, economic data. And the perception is hopefully, will be improving for the better. Even the marginal increase in perception would be better for the market overall. I have to say that, I was focusing on Kazakhstan and Mongolia today, but actually I was last week in Russia, and we hosted our annual event in Moscow, and we spoke with a lot of investment bankers and investors about the perception exactly, and we spoke about the outcome of the US election and how it actually affected the stocks, and so you can see that the stocks were in the green in the immediate, Russian stocks were in the green in the immediate fallout of the result. So it will be a very interesting space to watch, and from my perspective, the perspective of the a lot of ECM desks that I speak to, is that 2017 is going to be better, and hopefully we'll see this flow increase again.
Okay. So Peter, when you're advising a company who's looking to list to a stock exchange, do you advise them that they need to come to London if they want liquidity, or is there sufficient liquidity in the region?
I think liquidity is clearly one of the key points from an investor. On the pool of capital that London offers, and also if you're looking at something which is in the resource space, level of expertise that is here is very much one of the natural contenders. So pretty much yes, but I think you have got to look to see there may be some domestic desires, but then some of that people also need to understand how that's then going to impact price. If you have something which is then purely domestic without liquidity, what level of interest they're really going to get.
Yeah, it's interesting. Now, I've been told we have another 5 minutes, so I thought I'd open it out and see if anyone in the audience has got a question they'd like to ask our illustrious panel. Nothing instant, so I just had one other question which I'll throw open and anyone can answer. We see a lot of projects at the moment, and a lot of the criticism seems to be that there's over leverage, so they already have a lot of debt. Do you see this as a problem for financing? Do you see it changing in the short term, or is there a way around it for projects that are over leveraged to find financing?
If I might start, I think it's a question of the capital structure and the current or expected share prices, and there was clearly a feeling, and we did a big research piece just to educate us internally on diversification among commodities and what it all meant over the last couple of years. It's quite astonishing that most of the share prices moved very much in tandem for diversified companies or single commodity companies, and they all basically hit bottom somewhere between the 1st of October and I think it was the 27th of January this year. And since then, of course, the situation looks, if you take Cast Minerals, for instance, not necessarily well leveraged at the moment, but at the same time also very stable long-term financing, mainly out of China, and structured finance that is also not, I wouldn't call it aggressive capital. But the share price is up 300% basically since the bottom, and now it all looks quite a lot better. The question now is the current copper price indicative again for the next 3 months? Is the current coal price next 3 years, for instance? The market seems to think that we clearly have moved through the bottom, and that the prices we have seen at the beginning of the year were the low point, and it's probably not going to go below that, rather that it will stay where it's currently or actually increase further. From that perspective, there is no emergency anymore anywhere in the region, and the cash flows that companies will generate will so to say work itself through the P&L and then through the balance sheet, or sit in the balance sheet and re-leverage the company as they go forward. But clearly, if you have so to say 3.5-4 times net debt to EBITDA on a long-term basis, it is clearly a lot more difficult as if you have 1 or 2 times net debt to EBITDA but it always depends on the consensus prices. They look currently good and are getting up by the week, so to say.
No, listen, I think that's a very I think Kaz Minerals is a great example of a company that historically was seen as having too much leverage if you focus too much on a 1 or 2 year basis. And I think the whole point about these projects is they're 10 or 15 year projects. And so to take sort of traditional snapshot metrics actually clouds the issue of decision making around the capital structure. And I think the benefit that we've had, if you like, with if I use PwC's top 40 metric, we've had market capitalizations fall from about 1.6 trillion to about 800 billion, and that metric is indicative of things reaching book value again. So I think having slightly, let's say, extended, not 1 or 2 times, which is clearly an easy multiple, but maybe in the 3 to 4 times at current prices, people are beginning to feel much more comfortable than they were 18 months ago.
Okay. I think Alpha's telling me that's the end. I hope you've enjoyed the panel as much as I did, and I think we're off to lunch now.
Okay.